Now, the public inquiry into the Covid pandemic opened today. Was the government prepared here in the UK, and did they respond appropriately? Those are some of the key questions that it will try to answer over the next few years. The inquiry is so wide-ranging that it's been split into separate sections, or modules as they're being called. Let's take you through some of the first ones. It'll look at how prepared we were for a pandemic of this scale. The second one, which should start before the end of this year, will look at how decisions were made and communicated by Boris Johnson and his cabinet. And then the third will investigate the impact of Covid on hospitals, on patients and healthcare workers. The other modules won't be announced until next year, but they're expected to include things like the vaccination programme, track and trace, and the closure of schools. A lot to cover then, and a long wait for answers. Well, the chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, vowed this morning that this will not drag on for decades. But that's little comfort for those families of some of those who died, as Catherine Nash now reports.
A permanent reminder of the thousands of people who died during the pandemic. Each heart on the Covid memorial wall symbolises someone loved and lost. But many families still grieving, like Fran Hall, are also waiting for answers into why their loved one wasn't better protected. Fran lost her husband Steve, who was shielding, 3 weeks after they got married in October 2020.
It's horrific, I think. That's the only word I can use to describe it. It's just, you lose that person, but you lose your whole future as well. So the time that we thought we'd have together, even though we knew that it wouldn't be, decades, we didn't expect him to die when he did, and everything changes. There's a huge amount of anger contained within the grief, and hopefully the answers that the inquiry will find will help to diminish that.
And that fight for answers officially began today as the Covid inquiry got underway, looking into how prepared the UK was for a pandemic and into its response, putting bereaved families at the heart of the investigation.
There is one word that sums up the pandemic for so many, and that is the word loss. Although there were positive aspects of the pandemic, for example, the way in which communities banded together to help each other and the vulnerable, millions of people suffered loss.
But despite the bereaved families campaign group raising its concerns that their voices won't be heard in the inquiry as loudly as they should be, for Fran, it's about the future and looking ahead.
So it ultimately has to be learning why we ended up in this catastrophic situation when there are 200,000 people dead and millions of people bereaved and millions of people with long Covid and just a devastated society under the surface. We need to understand how we got here, and hopefully that will stop it happening again.
As those who lost loved ones wait eagerly for the inquiry to start properly in the spring, it's the first chance for the UK as a whole to come together to reflect and learn from the events of the past few years. Catherine Nash, 5 News.